Good morning. I'm Edie Kuntz, and I want to tell you about my wonderful trip to the Holy Land. I'm starting.
We need that thing to do that again.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Anyway, I went in November of last year, and it was the most amazing thing that I have ever done. On the 19th of November, my cousin Marcia took us to the Cedar Rapids Airport, and from there we flew to Atlanta. And from Atlanta, we took Air France to Paris and then on to Tel Aviv. This is my travel buddy. Some of you know her as Karen Carmichael. That was her maiden name. She goes by Carr, but she was married to Gary Goodrich, so if that puts her anywhere in your view. And when we stopped at Charles de Gaulle Airport to refuel, it was snowing. And I thought, I shouldn't have had to see that this trip. And then we looked out the window a little later, and they're de-icing our plane. That white stuff you see flying around is the fluid they're spraying on our plane. And Karen said, I guess the sound doesn't come through. Karen said, that's going to slow us down. I said, well, it's better than ice on the wings. Okay. This picture on the left is the whole country of Israel. The middle one is the top part, and the right is the bottom part. Oops, wrong button. Oh, there we go. Okay, so up here is what they called the Gospel Triangle. It's where most of Jesus' preaching took place, this is the Sea of Galilee. It's north of that. And then over here is Bethlehem and Jerusalem. Okay? Okay. I don't know, I'm going to read this to you because you obviously can't read it real well. Israel was born in 1948 after the Arab-Israeli War, and a lot of the land that was fertile was a swamp. So they started by using ditches to drain that, and now most of their crops are grown in the Jordan River Valley. They wanted to be independent. And the reason they wanted to be independent was because they live in a hostile environment. Lebanon is on the north, Syria is on the north and east, Jordan's on the east, and Egypt's on the south, and then the Mediterranean Sea. So they really didn't have a lot of friendly faces close by. The tensions in the Middle East are still there. I was never aware of them when I was there. I never felt unsafe, although seeing the guards around the temple holding AK-47s did give me a glimpse that there could be problems. And in 1967, Israel thought they were going to be invaded by Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, so they beat them to the punch. And they attacked 18 of the airports in Egypt and knocked out 90% of their air force. Then they hit Syria and Jordan, and then they started their land action. And with that, they captured the Gaza Strip, the Sinai Peninsula, and the Golan Heights. And, I never knew what these places really were until I went there. Let's see. They lost about 20,000 soldiers for the Arabs and 800 for the Israelis. And the Sinai Peninsula went back to Egypt in a peace treaty. And the Palestine National Authority governs the Gaza Strip, which is still a real mess, and part of the West Bank near Jerusalem.
Gaza Strip is where to where?
Well, just a second, I'll tell you. Come back. Gaza Strip, I'll get this right eventually.
Does it go all the way to the Mediterranean?
The little orange strip right here, that's the Gaza Strip. Okay, and this is the West Bank, and probably most of the northern half is governed by the Palestinians.
Of the West Bank.
Mm-hmm. Okay? The government owns 90% of the land, And so if you build a house, what the house costs, the land is probably going to cost you the same amount of money. And he likened it to a Manhattan condo, which is around $1 million. So needless to say, most people live in apartment buildings. The car tax, if you buy a $35,000 car, the tax is $35,000. So not a lot of people have cars either. Gas is $6 a gallon, but they're not driving the distance. Nobody drives as far as Grinnell for a job. They're close. The average monthly income is $2,300, and that's with both parents working. They do have a 90% employment rate, and everybody serves in the military. We're talking 3 years for men and 2 years for women, except for the Arabs, because they don't want them to know what they're doing. And I think it's a really good thing, because those little privileged folks that think they can do anything get that whipped out of them in the military before they start in the workforce. However, I doubt that we'll ever see that here. The next day, then, we actually started doing some touring. Next to me is our guide, Erez Ben David. He is a Messianic Jew. He knows more about the Bible than I will never know in a lifetime. He has a photographic memory, but he also read to us off his phone Bible almost everywhere we went, so that we knew what was important about that site from what the Bible said. And let's see. He was real good about dividing what was actually fact and what was tradition, he called it. They added it to the story to make it go well. And there's a lot of that in some of the churches, and most of them were not Protestant. He was a reconnaissance soldier during the war, so he didn't really tell us much about where he'd been. You can't really see him, but our bus driver was amazing. He's the first white shirt from the left. Yeah. And he can park that tour bus in a place I'm not sure I'd try to park my Jeep. He was really good, and on the way back from the Golan Heights, he took us down this really curvy, windy road. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Some of the women were always going, We only had to stop once before we hit the guardrail, so it was pretty good. The first morning, this is what we saw when we looked out our hotel window, and that's the Sea of Galilee. We had a get-together to give us our instructions at an amphitheater in the park near there, and I'm the yellow arrow, and Karen is the, red arrow, yeah. All right. And Perry Stone is the guy up in the corner. He is an evangelist. He has a TV show that's called Manifest. I didn't really know much about him, but Karen did, and that's how we ended up here. Here we're boarding the boat to go on our trip on the Sea of Galilee, and once we got out there, we had church. It was wonderful. He gave a little message. We did a lot of singing. Days of Elijah. I want you to watch this little old lady while she chews her gum in time to the music. It's hilarious. Okay. The Sea of Galilee is 15 miles long and 8 miles wide. So it is kind of a wind tunnel. And so when they talk about the storms that come up in the Sea of Galilee very quickly, they do. Let's see. This is on the east side of the Sea of Galilee, and this is the only place that the land would allow those pigs that were infected with the demons that ran down into the sea. This is the spot. And our guide was hilarious too. He said, "This is where deviled ham came from." Let's see. As I pointed out when we looked at the map, north of the Sea of Galilee is where most of Jesus' preaching took place. They called it the Gospel Triangle, and it was Chorazin, Bethsaida, and Capernaum. And then north of that was Caesarea Philippi. Let's see. He came for the Jews. The Jews were mostly on the east and the north side. On the other side were the Gentiles, and they got it, but they didn't get it this time around. Seems like there was something else on there. Oh, and at Caesarea Philippi, it was a really nasty spot. In fact, the rabbis did not recommend that any of the Jews go there, but this is where Jesus asked his disciples, "Who do people say I am?" And some said Elijah, and some said Elisha, and Peter said, "You are the Christ," and that's the first time that we'd heard that. Then we went to the Mount of the Beatitudes. There's, of course, a church on top of everything, and it's usually under the rubble that we would want to see is probably about 10 foot down. They just built on top of rubble. They didn't move it. And so we walked through Jesus' classroom. This is where he gave the Sermon on the Mount and stuff. So it was kind of interesting to feel like you were there where they were sitting on the hillside listening. And then we went to Capernaum. This slide was really interesting to me. If you see, oops, I need two. One that, okay, right here, see that opening onto the street? And this is an apartment, and there are 3 bedrooms, and then a common area. However, extended families lived in this size apartment, and so most of the floor space was taken up when they were sleeping. And when it talked about going into your closet to pray, that would have been the back of these rooms. And it was interesting, in the Bible it says, I've gone to prepare a place for you. In my Father's house there are many mansions, however that goes. But anyway, when I think of a mansion, what do you think of? Some movie star's big estate. Yeah, well, he said people of that day thought, this is going to drive me crazy, thought more of an apartment of this size or maybe bigger. That was a mansion to them.
How old are the stones here that we're looking at?
The stones that we're looking at here, some of them may date back to Jesus' time, but most of these were probably rebuilt later. So I don't know for sure. And the reason they know that they were built later is see all these different carvings on these different stones? That tells you the period and the country that did the rebuilding. And there was an art major with us, and she ripped them all off and told me what they all were, but I can't write that fast, so you won't get it either. This is in Capernaum. Supposedly, this ruin underneath this church is where Peter lived. And the Catholics think Peter was the first pope, so they have this statue here. And in behind it is the Sea of Galilee, although you really can't see that. But one of the Pharisees or somebody asked Jesus, or maybe one of the disciples, I can't remember for sure, about paying the temple tax. And he said, yes, they needed to pay it. And they needed to go down to the sea, and the first fish they catch, look in its mouth, and there was a gold coin that was enough to pay the temple tax. These are coins from that day that our guide had. As you can see, their minting process wasn't as good as it is today. Once you get out away from the city, the land is not all that user-friendly. So when they're hiking from city to city, a lot of it looked like this that they were stomping over. They have pictures of Jesus being kind of little and wimpy, and it's like, this guy had to be a pretty good athlete, because it's about 100 miles from the northern part of the Sea of Galilee down to Jerusalem, and they figure they walked 20 miles a day. And we ate lunch at the kibbutz. A kibbutz is a commune. It's a self-sufficient neighborhood. They raise their own crops. They milk their own goats, not cows. Well, maybe some, but. And then they always had these big dining halls where everybody eats, so that's where we ate. Most of our meals had like 2 courses. The first course was vegetables and coleslaw and stuff like that, and then we had pita bread to put it in. And then our main course here were Peter's fish. And you can't see the eyeball real well in this picture, but it was there. And I looked at that and I thought, well, this is interesting. I had to ask 3 different people before they could tell me how they cooked it in deep oil. The skin and the fins and everything were real tough. You know, when you fry a panfish, the tail's crispy. You know, not this one. Anyway, it was really funny. Since I grew up eating pond fish, you know, I cut down along the fins on the front by the head, skinned my fork down, flipped the meat over, turned it over, and did the same thing. And the people at my table are just kind of going, "What in the world?" They all tried to do the same thing then. Okay, the next place we went was to the baptismal site. And this, of course, was the highlight of my trip. The Jordan River is a little low because of the increased temperatures, but the Jordanians are pulling a lot of water out of it for their grain production. The water really did not look green. It looked green in every picture, but it really wasn't that green. It was kind of tinged that color, but it was clear. You could look down and see your feet. This is my friend Karen getting baptized. And this is me. The minister on my right side gave a little message before we started and talked about baptism and how important it was and that kind of thing. And he said, if you've never been baptized, you need to let me know when you come down. Okay. So I told him I had been sprinkled as an infant but never been immersed. So he asked me the very same questions that you have heard Joel ask to the people that have been baptized recently. And those would be?
Do you believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God?
Very good. Yep. And so I got dunked. Okay. The next day then, you can see the clouds in the Sea of Galilee. And this is looking from the north down. We went past this roadside ruins. It was a ritual bath. That was a big thing back then. You know, they had to get cleaned up before they could go to the temple, and it was just a common thing in that society. This was at Khorasan, the synagogue. It had been built with some funds from Ishmael's family way back when, and there was a special chair there that they felt like Abraham had probably sat in. And, you know, it was for dignitaries and stuff, but, you know, I had to try it out. Besides, this isn't the real one. It's in the Israeli Museum, so I wasn't doing anything bad. And you know that Jesus was not always real well received there. So in Luke, it says, "Woe to you, Chorazin and Bethsaida and Capernaum, you go down to the depths." He was telling them they weren't paying attention to what he was telling them, and it was going to turn out bad for them. And then there was this beautiful rainbow right when we got ready to leave. And Chorazin was that close to the Sea of Galilee, so it's all in that triangle up on the top. I was interested in the farming stuff, probably nobody else was, but they grow oranges, bananas, and they put little blue bags over the bananas. I don't know if it's for the bugs or for what. And then sometimes they just covered them. That big netting up in the middle is actually a banana field. So they had vineyards. They had reservoirs because they didn't get a lot of rain, so they had to have something to pull out to water their crops. They had a few cattle, so I thought we should see the work and shoot. And we saw 2 groups of cattle that were of any size. We saw an occasional cow now and then. And then we went to Caesarea Philippi. And the rabbis did not encourage people to go there. Jesus did take his disciples there. And this is also where Peter declared, "You are the Christ." Did it again. Well, we'll just go to this one. No, there we go. This is the entrance to the temple area where they worshiped Baal and then later Pan. And the hole over here is the gate to Hades. This city was built by Philip, Herod's son, And this cavern was like 800 and some feet deep, so they thought it had no bottom. And that's why they thought it was went to Hades. Then we went to Tel Dan. A Tel is a group of ruins that dates back to certain eras, and this was where the tribe of Dan lived. We filmed the manifest thing there, and so I'm there smiling at you. And this was the camera crew, and this is the beginnings of the Jordan River. It's here that it comes out from the mountains. It's come down through the mountains a ways, and here then it's visible. This is the plain in front of Tel Dan. Everything was built up on a hill for protection. And it said that the children of Dan, in Joshua, that the children of Dan went up and captured Leshan, and then they made their home there and renamed it Dan for their father. This is part of their security system. The door is in the back corner here, and these rocks out front are real smooth. If you walk on them, even when it's dry, they're a little slippery. When it was wet, they were real slippery. And when someone attacked them, they poured hot oil over them, so they really couldn't walk on them at all. And the city wall. And then there's a part of this where they feel Abraham had been. So they have Abraham's gate. They are excavating it now. They've built this shelter over it because these are mud bricks, and you know what the environment would do to a mud brick. If you notice the steps, and then if you look at this model, you can see how it was in its heyday. Then we went to the kibitz for lunch. This was an interesting lunch. The noodles down on the front there with the carrots sticking out, they really did look like worms, but they were noodles. I checked them. And then next to it is a deep fried meat thing. It looked like a chimichanga to me, but it didn't have any Mexican seasoning. And then next to that is eggplant and summer squash and different vegetables. And then there's rice underneath there, and then the one with the sesame seeds on it is a chicken finger. We had chicken every meal, I think, but that's okay. I knew what that was. And then we also had potatoes and some steamed mushrooms. And Karen liked beets, so you can see beets on hers. And on the upper left, that's actually roast beef. And this is the only identifiable piece of chicken that I saw the whole time I was there. I think they just take a meat cleaver and hack it up. Then we went to the Golan Heights, and I have heard about that on the news for years, but I had no idea what it was. Well, that ridge across the top is a volcanic ridge, and whoever controls that controls the valley where all of the crops are produced. And this is the UN Peace. Oh, nope, this is just a picture of the volcanic ridge again. There were lots of bombed out buildings and temples and stuff, and they just left them. They haven't done anything with them because the ground really isn't worth a whole lot other than for security purposes. This is the UN peacekeeping compound, and they had apple orchards all around it. This is Mount Hermon. Some people think that this is where the Transfiguration took place. Some feel like it was at Mount Tabor. Elijah and Elisha were probably in this area when they were on earth. And the snow-capped mountain range is where the headwaters of the Jordan River begin. Now, there's a tractor in this picture, and I can't for the life of me figure out what it's doing, so I blew it up. First, I thought maybe it was spreading, that stuff. But then there's a pipe that's spitting out smoke, so I'm not real sure what they were doing. If anybody figures it out, let me know. There were vendors everywhere. This was at the Golan Heights in an overlook, and he was selling his fruits. This is one of the bombed out spots, And the first time I looked at this one, I saw that yellow thing up there in the, whoops. I saw that yellow thing up here in the field, and I thought, New Holland Combine. And then I thought, well, there's anything to combine here. So I blew the picture up, and it's a tank. And they just left them. They use them for target practice. This is the road. Somewhere in there I missed one. There are, on the fence, on a lot of places, there are yellow signs. I couldn't read them. But Erez said, they say, beware of landmines. They didn't clear the areas. They just left them. So if it has a fence and a yellow sign, don't go there. This is the road that Hallett took us down. And you can see that it kind of weaves through and up and around the mountain. And this was the border fence. We were that close to Jordan, or Syria. Oh, here's the fence with the yellow signs. And then it was Thanksgiving Day, so they had Thanksgiving dinner for us at the hotel. And this is a salad bar. There were lots of things on there that I did not recognize. And not being real adventuresome, I didn't try some of them either. They did have turkey, and I wanted to show this poor chef how you carve a turkey because he didn't know, and he had a meat cleaver, and it was in chunks. But it tasted pretty good. Desserts were wonderful. They had lots of pastries and fruits and pudding type things. The food was good, and it didn't have, I expected to have some spices that I might not like, but they didn't, or else they didn't for us anyway. Then the next day, we went to Caesarea by the Sea. This was built by Herod the Great. He built this wonderful city because he wanted the Roman Empire to acknowledge him, to know that he was good. And let's see, they had a hippodrome, which is where they did the chariot races and those kinds of things. They had a theater. We'll look at that in a little bit. And Herod's palace. This was also where they took Paul after he was arrested because they didn't feel he was real safe wherever that was. And so they took him here. And his cell was close to the hippodrome. So later in his life, when he described things in the Bible, he used the sports things. In Philippians, it says, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me, heavenward in Christ Jesus. And then in 2 Timothy, I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race.
We'll hear that first one later.
Okay. Anyway, that's why he used those kinds of terms. And you don't see them anywhere else in the Bible. This is the stage on the theater. This is the public restroom, just like it is. Now, across the front here is a little trough, and that was clean water. That's where you washed out your sponge that you carried to wipe your bottom and your hands. And then back here was another trough, and that was to get rid of the refuse, okay? Now, this is where you sat, on those stones across the top. And I guess because they all wore long robes, it wasn't immodest, but I didn't want to try it. This is the hippodrome. It's got a sand floor. It's where they did the chariot races and stuff. And this is part of the aqueduct that brought water to the city. That just amazes me that they were able to figure that all out. Anything they plant there has to be irrigated because it won't grow otherwise.
What was the source of water for the aqueduct?
I don't know for sure. I assume it came down from the mountains, but I guess I didn't ask that question. That's your...
Obviously built by the Romans.
Yes. And that'll be your homework. You can look that up and let me know. Next, we went to Megiddo, and this is an interesting place. It overlooks the Armageddon plains where they feel the last fight between good and evil will take place. It's a World Historic Site, and these are the walls. They have shored them up with concrete. This is a feeding trough. And since there's very little wood in that area, they think maybe this was the kind of trough Jesus was in, because they really didn't have a lot of wood, even though that's what we always see. I think it'd be darn hard to stay warm in something like that, and at one point they thought maybe Jesus' family weren't carpenters but stonemasons because everything was built from stone. Picture of the ruins, and down there in the middle is the altar where the sacrifices were done. This wall, they feel like they have gotten down to where Solomon probably built. The black part is what was sticking out of the ground, so it's weathered, and the white part is been covered with dirt until they excavated it, and so that's why it looks nice and clean. This is Mount Tabor, probably where the Transfiguration took place. They also used this as a message center. They put beacons on the hill to let the northern Jews know when there were Jewish holidays and when the new month started. And around that is the Jezreel Valley. Major farming area. There were lots of fields that looked like they had been plowed or seeded or disc or whatever because they were brown. And in September and October, they start doing their plowing. And then they plant in November. In February and March, they harvest the flax. And in May, they harvest the barley. May and July, they also harvest the wheat and the first figs. August and July, they did the grapes. And then August through September, they did the dates and the summer figs. So they had a rotation just like we do here.
This crop here that we're looking at, is it too big for grapes?
It's not grapes. I don't know for sure what it is.
Perhaps big.
Some kind of trees. This particular tree was at one of the kibitzes we went to, and it had these big yellow lily-like flowers. But if you look at the spines on that tree, nobody's going to climb that one. I don't know what kind of a tree that was. I couldn't find anything about it. This was between Tel Dan, Megiddo, and on our way to Nazareth. And it was just along the roadside. Karen got a good picture of it. And you know, when they talk about rolling the stone away, it kind of made sense. I always figured it was a big rock they were trying to push, but maybe not. They're building everywhere. This is the Israeli national bird, the crane. And everybody pretty much lives in apartment houses. These are some of the higher rent ones. Then we went to Nazareth, and that's me with Nazareth behind me. This was where that was on the Mount of the Precipice. I never can hardly say that. But this is where the crowd of Nazareth said, "Oh, this is the carpenter's son. What does he know? We think he's blaspheming, and they're going to push him off the cliff." And that's what the plaque said. However, in Luke, it says that he went away through the crowd. And this is what Erez was talking about when he talked about tradition versus the fact. Okay? And this is the cliff. So, you know, it would have been a pretty big fall to get there. I thought this was hilarious. It says, tunnel ahead, you think? I mean, they put the sign where you can already see it. Oh, well. Then the next day, we went to Bet Shean, which is where near Beersheba and some of those names that we're kind of familiar with from the Bible. These are the ruins there. This is a mock-up of the actual city that it looked like before it was destroyed. And just pictures of the ruins. If you saw Jesus Christ Superstar, on that hill there's a tree where Judas hung himself. I haven't, so I don't know. Anyway, this is the stage. This seats 7,000 people. It was in kind of like 3 sections. I don't know if you can see that, but the wall on the back of the stage was 63 feet tall. They did mostly pantomimes and imitations because the crowd was not sophisticated enough for comedies and tragedies. They also met there as a meeting place, like it was like where the town hall meeting would be when they were discussing politics or issues. On the left is what it looked like after the 749 AD earthquake, and on the right, they have started to restore. It's interesting that they are also changing the BC and AD, BCE, before Common Era, or CE, Common Era, which is AD. They can't leave anything alone. This is part of the dig there at Bet-Shean, and they cover it because a lot of the stuff was made out of mud, bricks, stuff like that, and the environment would wreck it. Just another picture of the ruins. Look at the size of that pillar. You know, I don't know how they moved these things, but this supposedly is how they moved them. This was designed by, I think it was a man in Crete, and they hooked, they put eyes on the front and hooked cables to the oxen, and then inside was like an axle. And, you know, this is the description, but I still couldn't figure out what it meant, so we're not going to worry about it. Anyway, here's another picture of that, and how that moved those things is beyond me. How did they get them on there? That's what I wanted to know. Then we went to the Dead Sea. This was the only place in the whole trip where they served us by plate. It was a restaurant for the tourists. And we had steak fries and various and sundry other things. This is the beach there. I rode a camel. Notice I rode the short one. I never would have been able to get on the tall one. And you have this thing like a saddle horn, kind of. And when the camel lays down so you can get on and off, they go down on their front knees first, and the back legs are still straight. You know, if you aren't paying attention, you would do a header over the handlebars on this baby. And then the Dead Sea is very low. The mud flats are visible, and the mud is supposed to be good for your skin. I didn't find out. The bougainvillea were beautiful. And this was the roadside agriculture we saw on the 24th. They had a lot of hoop roof buildings, and I'm not sure what they grew in them. They also had date palms. When they talk about Canaan being the land of milk and honey, it's goat milk and date honey. It's not like we would think. Oh, there's a banana grove in the front there covered with netting. I saw one cornfield, and they do figs, and the fig leaves are like this. So you can see why Adam and Eve chose those for clothing, because the olive leaves are like this. Wouldn't have helped much. Pomegranates, and I don't know what they were growing under these, so it was rather labor intensive, but they're little plastic hoods like over the rows, so I assume it's some kind of vegetables. The Bedouins are still around. They, however, don't live in tents anymore. They have steel siding sheds. And if you can see the red spot in the middle, right here, it doesn't show up very well, that is a clothesline. And I don't know where in the world they wash their clothes, because I see nothing around there that would help you do that. And this is the Cadillac Bedouin site, because they had water there, so they had trees and stuff. And this is a picture of a goat herd, and you can see the kind of ground they're walking over. I don't even know how they fed them, and then the people were walking there as well. We left there and went into Jerusalem. It was Saturday, which is the Sabbath, and these Orthodox Jews are going to service. And because it was Saturday, the stores were all closed, and there was almost no traffic, because you can't do any work on the Sabbath. In fact, the women weren't even supposed to look in the mirror and comb their hair for church, because that's work. From there, we went to the Israeli Museum, and you see the tent-like thing, the white thing in the middle there, and the water that's spraying on it. That is part of the climate-controlled environment for the Dead Sea Scrolls. We could not take any pictures in where that was. This is just one of the displays there because of security. Then we went and looked at a model of the Jerusalem. And you can see how big the temple was in relation to the town. I mean, the thing is huge. And then in David's day, the city line was here. This was his palace down here. During Jesus' time, it was more just this part. And it has gone on from there. Jerusalem is divided into different sections, and even though there's all the different nationalities, the Armenian section is here. This is Jewish, and so this is the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall, where they're up against the temple. And then the Christians are up here, the Jewish people are here, and the Muslims are up here. So when they went to Golgotha, they went out this way, and it was outside the city wall. And that's why we had a different guide when we talked about that. You'll see that in a minute. And more pictures of food. Some of you I know are interested in that. And we had potatoes and chicken every meal. The soup, I didn't try it, but it looked like a pan of green water. I thought maybe it was split pea and it needed stirring. No, there wasn't anything else in the bottom, but all of it was real watery looking. I don't know. Anyway, and then one night we had Hungarian goulash, chicken asada, which is steak, and then meat-stuffed artichokes. I liked it when they put signs out so you could tell what it was. Okay, the next day then we went to the Mount of Olives. This is a picture of part of Jerusalem from the Mount. Here's some more. And the gold dome that's in the middle of the temple area, it is Muslim. They think that's where Muhammad or somebody ascended, and so they parked it right in the middle. What I wanted to show you with this picture, though, was the Kidron Valley is between the temple and the Mount of Olives. So it's down in here. And you can see how deep it is. You know, you think when Jesus preached in the temple, they always went back to the Mount of Olives a lot of the time to stay in that area. And, you know, it's like a 2-mile hike. And right in front are Jewish cemetery, and you can see some holy men down there in the corner. And they don't take whoops. I was doing so good. They don't take flowers to the cemetery. They put rocks on the graves. So if you go to visit, you put a rock on it, and then they know someone has been there to visit. Some have lots of rocks, some have no rocks. And this is in the old part where they actually carved it out of the stone. And this is the upscale one. They had lots of money, evidently. There was a vendor everywhere. This gentleman wanted to how you take a picture with his white donkey and pay him. This was where we were filming another Manifest episode, and Karen's up there in the left corner. I was sitting down in the back. When the Jews came back to Jerusalem after the war, they had to have their community be totally self-sufficient because they had no friends. And so they had their own windmills to grind their own grain. We went to Bethlehem. Bethlehem is under Muslim control, so we picked up another guide as we went through. And this is just a picture of the city. Nothing that we would want to see in Bethlehem is really around anymore. It's all been built over top of. Then we went to the tent restaurant for lunch. It actually had the ceiling. This was our first course. You've got carrots, red cabbage, corn, coleslaw, hummus. And I'm not a hummus fan, but theirs was pretty good, and pita bread. And then for lunch, we had steak fries and tomatoes, and that light brown one is chicken. The dark brown one was their specialty. It's a barbecued meat. I'm not real sure what the meat was, but it tasted fairly good. Everything is served family style. We had baklava for dessert. And then they brought the coffee. Now, I'm not a coffee drinker, but that stuff looked like sludge. And the people who tasted it said it sort of tasted like that. It's real strong. This is outside of Jerusalem, about 7 miles, and it's a mountain, and Herod's summer home was on the top of that. We went to the shepherd's field, and of course there was another photo op with this young man and his lamb. And if you look at the grassy area, they didn't have much to eat, but the sheep evidently survived well. So when they talked about the shepherds in their fields at night, when we sang the Christmas hymns, it was really interesting for me. This was a cave near there where they felt they probably kept their sheep at night to protect them. And this church was built by the Crusaders. It's St. Anne's Church. This is another tradition thing. Anne was supposed to be the mother of Mary. I don't know about you guys, but I've never found that in there. The Crusaders were marvelous at architecture. The acoustics in this building were amazing. And these were some of the pictures on the ceiling. We drove by the U.S. Embassy. The Israelis are extremely pleased that President Trump moved it there. It is the capital, but it had been in Tel Aviv. And there's one of the guards. She's smiling, but, she's got her gun. Then we went to Gethsemane, and this is me at the Garden of Gethsemane. Those big tree trunks, some of those trees are 3,000 years old. Just amazing. And that's us walking up there, and the church that's there. And the Sanctuary of the Agony of Jesus Christ, Basilica of Gethsemane. That was quite a handle. I think Madison's much easier. And it's really sad that you got to tell them not to talk in church and not wear their hats. This is one of the pictures in that church where Jesus is praying in Gethsemane, and the gold dome has got to be worth a fortune. The next day then, these are just some of the street signs. They're in Hebrew, Arabic, and English. One of the temple gates. This one was well guarded. We sat on the southern temple steps, and they filmed another one of those episodes. And then this was a walkway as we were going back toward the bus. Those little rectangular spots, those were little stores or where they sold wares. And they're in the excavating this area now, and they think that some of these stones in the walkway there may be down to where they were when Jesus was here. The temple stones are truly amazing. This is the width. Length is 45 feet, width is 15 feet, and they're 11 and a half inches tall. So one of those weighs about the same as 9 or 10 tanks. And that's like 570 to 630 tons. How in the world did they move these babies? Then we went to King David's tomb. It was well signed, but you really couldn't see exactly that it was a tomb. Then we went to the Western Wall. One of the Orthodox Jews was coming in there, and it's me. And I thought this was really neat. It says, "Dear visitors, you are approaching the holy site of the Western Wall, where the divine presence always rests. Please make sure you are appropriately and modestly dressed so as not to cause harm to this holy place or to the feelings of the worshipers. Sincerely, Rabbi of the Western Wall and Holy Sites." And I didn't see anybody that was, risque. And you had to go through a checkpoint like you do at the airport to get in there. And this is the wall. And there are people there praying with their hand on the wall. And you were supposed to write down your prayer and then stick it in the wall. I did do that, but I thought, I don't know why, because I'm talking to the guy upstairs. I don't need to write mine down and put it in the wall, but I did. This is a picture from farther back. You can see how tall the temple wall is there. That's the men's side. The women are on this side. This was a group coming to celebrate a bar mitzvah at the Western Wall. The young man that's being honored is next to the guy on this side with the drum. These guys drummed and chanted. There was another group that had instruments, and they played and sang hymns. Then we went to the upper room. Now, this was on our way up the stairs. This is a group of soldiers, and they train their soldiers what the holy sites mean to those that they're sacred to. So when they're defending them, they know what they're defending, which I thought was really neat. There's a stained glass window there. I couldn't see anything in that place that looked like the Last Supper room to me, but okay, that's where they said it was. There was a cute little group of school kids down eating their lunch as we were coming down, and they were waving at us, trying to get us to take their picture. Since there are no kibitzes in Jerusalem, we ate at the wedding club. This was the best bread we had in the whole trip. They have amazing stuff. I don't know why we have to eat the stuff we eat. This is a church that's over where Caiaphas's house was, where they took Jesus when the chief priests arrested. Thank you. And then also at that church is this sculpture of Peter denying Christ. And you see the servant girls there. They were around the fire. And they asked him if he was with the Galilean, and he said he didn't know who he was. And about then the cock crowed for the third time, and that's in Matthew. As we were walking back to the bus, there was this little wooden box, and it's like, I wonder what that is. Well, they put the bodies in there to take to the crypts, because let's face it, you're not going to back a hearse in there. So they had to carry them in. This is a Muslim cemetery. The Muslim parts of the city and the cemeteries were a little trashy. The Jewish ones were spick and span. This is the guide we had in the Muslim section, which is where Golgotha and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Then Pilate turned Jesus over to the party to be crucified, and so they took him out of the city wall to a place in Hebrew called Golgotha, and this place of the skull, and that's where he was crucified. And there was one robber on the right and one on the left, and one of them said, "Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And the next line has always been my favorite: "Today you will be with me in paradise." I'm not going to have to go someplace else for a while first. From where we listened to this man talk, there was a bus stop, and the gals were picking up their kids from school. Then we went to the garden tomb. And there again, they have to warn you to be quiet. It's a place of contemplative worship, And this is a picture of the tomb behind all of these people, and the inside of the tomb. And on the outside, there were some of these little boxes. They're called ossuaries. It's where they put the bones when they clean out the area for the next one. We had communion at the empty tomb, and it was really neat. We each got a little, preparing communion here, you think is something. All 400 of us got a little olive wood cup with juice in it, or wine, I'm not sure. I don't remember how it tasted. And, of course, we had a little church service along with that. As we walked back to the bus a different way, we went by this. It's a menorah that has been made by the Temple Institute that is supposed to be a replica of ones that were in the original temple. It's made of 99.2 pounds of gold, 24 karat, and it's worth several $1 million. I don't know what the stuff around it is. It's got to be bulletproof glass or something, but it was kind of neat. And then the last day we went to the old city where the pool of Bethesda is, and this was that pool. Remember in the Bible it talked about how the one man couldn't get down to the pool in time to get healed, and then Jesus healed him. Cardo is the marketplace, and there's new stores, there's old stores, there's ruins, all together, and some of it dates back even to when the Jewish kings were around. Chicken, they have chicken everywhere. And I was taking these as I was walking, and I should have stopped, but there's different kinds of stores, clothes, bakery, This older couple, that's where the local people do their shopping. And shoes, street vendors. Oh, the bread smelled good. And one place they even had Tide. This is a hardware store. How you found anything there you wanted, I have no idea. But you can see a hose on the wall and different implements along the side, and it was kind of interesting. And then this is the barbershop. And that was all along the Via Dolorosa, which is called the Way of the Cross. And it was very narrow. Some of it was uphill with steps. I can't imagine Jesus walking through that after he had been beaten so severely, and carrying his cross. Just a second. Orthodox Jew. There were Lutheran churches, there were Methodist, Armenian. You read that? You'll never see a police station dedicated to a church in this country. This supposedly was where Jesus was imprisoned. This next one is interesting. What's wrong with this picture? It was taken in Jerusalem on the way of the cross. I don't know if Mary was born in... Whoops, just a minute. No, that's the necklace. Well, I don't know where it is. Anyway, that's okay. It seems to be slacking up, so... Anyway, so this is the tradition part. This is the Armenian church, and see that round thing? Those were the stations of the cross, as the Catholics know them. And they said, get over, there's a tractor coming. And I thought, tractor will never fit through here, but I guess that kind will. Souvenir shops along the Via Dolorosa, and we were guarded well with the M16 or AK-47 or whatever that thing is. I have some, thank you. Then they thought this was down to the bedrock where Jesus probably actually walked. There was this on the side where they, supposedly this is where Jesus fell with his cross and he fell into the wall. There are people over there kissing the stone and stuff, and I guess if that's what you want to do, that's fine. We went to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. This is one of the paintings in there. This slab of rock in the front supposedly was where Jesus was laid before he was put into the tomb, and they were kissing that rock too. Pictures of Mary, another part of the interior decoration, and that was the Via Dolorosa. One of the most important things I learned about history is that tradition gets mixed up with it. And, simply because that's how the story told doesn't necessarily mean that's what happened. And that's like the three wise men. It doesn't really say there are three wise men in the Bible. It says that there are three gifts. When I looked up the Eastern stuff, it talked about how usually those folks traveled in 12s. And the gifts that they brought certainly would not have been the kind of gift they would have brought for a king, but Joseph and Mary would have never been able to carry it. So, and then Mary's mother was Anne, and the wooden manger. So tradition involves a lot more than the facts that the Bible gives. And there are two sites where they think Jesus was buried. One is the Holy Sepulchre Church, and the other one is the Garden Tomb. And people were starting to say, well, it's this one, no, it's this one, that kind of thing. And Erez, bless his kind heart, he said it doesn't really matter which one's correct because they're both empty. Thank you. Yes.
Souvenirs? Did you come back with any physical souvenirs?
Not many. I have a rock from the Sea of Galilee. I have a cute little camel. What else?
Did you break a stone off the Holy Sepulchre?
No, I didn't. I didn't kiss it either.